Hi everyone. So tomorrow, in a little over 12 hours time, we have the new moon in Gemini. And I'm going to do a new moon video tomorrow. I don't know when tomorrow I'll be able to do it. It might be a little bit later in the day, but it will be tomorrow. So this is not a new moon in Gemini video. I tend to like doing new moon videos after the new moon, which is unusual for YouTube, but that's what I'm going to do, because the timing works out well. And there's this one transit that I want to talk about in this particular video, so I'm going to go ahead and do so. So as we've set the stage so far, in the past few videos, we've talked ad nauseum about Venus retrograde in Gemini. We've talked about planets and events that are developing. We've talked about this new moon in Gemini, at which we're going to have the sun and the moon conjunct, of course, together, which is what makes a new moon. We're going to have a retrograde Venus and Mercury conjunct, or they will just have completed they'll just have completed that conjunction before the new moon. So we're going to have four planets, if we want to call them that: the sun, the moon, Venus retrograde, and Mercury in the sign of Gemini, and they're going to be squaring Neptune in Pisces and Mars in Pisces. The new moon is going to square, that was a little hornet there, sorry if you noticed my face. So there we have the new moon in Gemini squaring Mars, and we have the Venus and Mercury conjunction squaring Neptune as far as this new moon is concerned. So we've talked a fair amount about Venus retrograde in Gemini and Mercury in Gemini. I'm going to talk tomorrow about the new moon. We've talked about Neptune and Pisces, but I haven't had a chance to talk about Mars in Pisces, which certainly adds a certain amount of flavor to this dynamic, intense set of aspects between Gemini, the sign of communication and data and information and chatter and writing and fitting in, where there's so much built up energy right now, and Pisces, the sign of dissolving and spirit and togetherness and unity of a certain kind, an extraordinarily non-material sign. And there's a certain amount of tension between those planetary bodies. I'm not going to focus so much on that tension. You have plenty of videos, my last few videos, that will talk about that and build on that. And my new moon video tomorrow will also build on it. Just know that this build-up is very much is significant both for this new moon in Gemini and really quite significant for the full moon lunar eclipse in Sagittarius on June the 5th. Okay, Mars in Pisces. The planet Mars is the planet of pursuit and action. So if Venus is the more female archetype planet, Mars is the more male archetype planet, the planet of desire, the planet of pursuit, the planet of pursuing your goals. Mars indicates your energy, and wherever Mars is, whatever part of the chart Mars is in, a lot of action plays out or energy plays out in that part of the chart at any given time, because Mars's energy is outward, it's external, it's where you're spending a lot of effort and time and energy to get certain things done, whether it's the achievement of goals, whether it is defending boundaries, whether it is some sort of attack or combat. Mars is the planet of war. Mars is the god of war archetypally. It is that male yang planet, the hunter-gatherer, the protector, the going after what you want, the shooter of arrows, to hit a certain target, whether they are goals or whether it's a form of attack. And it's the red planet. And if you know where Pisces sits in your chart, Mars entered this part of the chart on May the 13th and leaves on June the 28th. Between June the 25th and June the 29th, there are a lot of changes at the end of June in terms of planets switching and setting us up for the second half of the year, which you would think it's the end of June. That's exactly what they're going to do. So Mars's transit in Pisces, as you headed towards May the 13th, there may well have been a certain shift in terms of what it is that you were going after or felt that needed to be dealt with. As I've mentioned numerous times on these videos, the sign of Pisces experienced a certain crisis at the end of 2015 and for much of 2016. And Mars's presence here, and Mercury was retrograde in Pisces earlier this year in February and March. We had other transits in Pisces that are setting us up for now. And in a certain sense, all this build-up, and as I've mentioned before, outside of the eclipses, the sign of Pisces is super important for the first half of this year, and the sign of Aries is super important for the second half of the year. Strangely kind of magical in a way, because Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. 2020 is proving to be, astrologically and in reality, an extraordinarily pivotal year. So there's something really interesting about the fact that outside of the eclipses, the first half of the year has a sense of, the last sign of the zodiac, and the second half of the year has an emphasis on the first sign of the zodiac. We'll deal with that in future videos. But as this transition occurs, the planet of war is in the extraordinarily watery sign of Pisces. Now, planets, when they transit or travel, it's a little bit like, it is like travel. You're taking, the planet takes its personality and visits different lands and visits different parts of your chart. And it's a little bit like, and the planet is either constrained or enhanced by the culture of the sign that it's visiting. So it's a little bit like visiting the United Kingdom from the United States, and certain aspects are compatible, but certain things can't be done. In other words, you can't drive on the wrong side of the road. You can't drive the way you would drive if you chose to rent a car in the UK and you were coming from the US on the same side of the road that you would here. You would be a hazard. You could hurt someone. You could kill someone. You could hurt yourself. And it is precisely this kind of adjustment that becomes really characteristic of a planet's travel or transit in a sign. In certain signs, planets are exalted or they rule certain signs. The Sun rules Aries, Venus rules Taurus, Mercury rules Gemini. In certain cases, a planet is exalted or comfortable or rejoices of being in a certain sign. The Moon is exalted in Taurus. Goodness, I'm trying to think of other examples, and none of them are coming that easily to me. Jupiter is exalted in the sign of Cancer, for example. Thank you, universe. But there are also signs where a planet is fallen or debilitated. So Mercury, it's typically the sign opposite the sign that you rule that you would be debilitated in, fallen in. So, the Sun does not really have a great time being in the sign of Libra, for example, etc., etc. I'm not going to give you a list of debilitation, but Mars is neither fallen or debilitated or fallen, neither exalted or fallen in the sign of Pisces. But it's not the most comfortable place for Mars to be. Mars is going to move into Aries for the rest of the year, the second half of the year. And Mars rules Aries. So in terms of energy and vitality and going after what you want to go after, the second half of the year is a pronounced yang feel to it in that regard. But think of this red planet with all this energy and drive, and either it's the pursuit of goals or it's a sort of form of defense and attack. That's really what we would give with Mars. It goes into, it's like this giant red-hot planet hits the ocean of Pisces. And of course, what's going to happen when this aggressive, fiery entity meets this watery ocean? It's going to fizzle out. It's a little bit like, in India, there's a festival that happens every year called Diwali, and we have these rockets that you can fireworks. They're fireworks. They aren't rockets really. They are shaped like rockets, and there's a fuse underneath them. I'll use that word. And you light it, and they shoot up into the sky and do nice things. Every now and then, you would get a rocket that most rockets you would light, and you had to be careful, and they would shoot up, and they'd be amazing. Every now you would get one that would act a little funky. It might not quite go up, or it might not quite follow that path. And with Mars in Pisces, actions, and particularly actions that are related to attack or defense, or particularly going after certain goals, have this kind of rocket in the ocean feel. You light it, but you don't quite know what it's going to do. You don't quite know where it's going to go. The idea of pursuing actions in combat is somehow compromised, so that you might be taking action of some sort, but it doesn't quite hit its target. And if anything, it it can have a slightly self-damaging component. It's a little bit like, it's not as extreme as taking an axe to your own foot. It's a little bit like you light the rocket and just, you kind of have to, you kind of thought that you were doing something that would clarify something or something like, and yet it has a kind of unintendedly messy consequence where it could just, instead of going up, the rocket could just kind of move forward and everyone has to clear the space, or it can end up putting sparks on you, or, it has that kind of, you might think that you're responding to something, or you might think you're taking action of some sort. And this has been true since the middle of May. And then you might realize that after you take this action, you go, oh gosh, not only is that not going to have its intended purpose, it might create more confusion. It also kind of, in its own strange way, makes me look bad, or makes me look guilty of something, or something along those lines. It's not the most comfortable place for a direct masculine planet to be in. So what does this basically mean? Out of all the planets that are squaring each other, there's no question that there's a sense of communication remains paramount, right? Because Mercury is very, very strongly placed in Gemini right now, and we have the new moon in Gemini, and everything's preparing for that. And Venus is retrograde, reasonably placed in Gemini, retracing her steps and reevaluating finances and relationships. Neptune is powerful in Pisces, the sign he rules. So the idea of loss and selflessness and the abolishment of the ego, often manifesting through either deception or sort of sneaky behavior of some kind, or theft, or spirituality. The spirituality of loss, the spirituality of unity, the spirituality of knowing that you don't really possess anything, very Neptunian. And also kind of connecting you to spirit in ways of music, in ways that are not rational, not mind-based, that are the product of putting you in a different space. With Neptune, mind-altering substances, alcohol, music, listening to the music of the spheres, spirituality, mysticism, all of that is strong. In most practical terms, I would say that there are conversations about, or communications about, some sort of deception or loss related to where Pisces sits in your chart that is happening in connection with where Gemini sits in your chart, right? If I was to look at it in really practical terms. I wish I could focus on the more artistic or creative aspects of Neptune, but with this square, it has more to do with grappling with a certain amount of murkiness through communication and reevaluating relationships. Well, the new moon tomorrow really gets that going, and even in a let's just say that it keeps the theme going for another 30 days or so, okay? But you can't factor out Mars, the planet of action, achieving goals, but most relevantly, I think, in a square context, which is a struggle, contributing to it through actions of attack and defense. But the attack and defense mechanism is the weakest part of this link. This is why when I did my last video, I cautioned against, through the reevaluation process, and this is true anyway with Venus retrograde. It's the classic return of the X. The classic things with Venus retrograde, we say don't change your appearance, reevaluate it, don't spend too much money, reevaluate relationships, reevaluate where your expenses are and where your money is going. Artistic or creative opportunities from the past may come up, relationships from the past may come up, but it's sort of the classic, the return of the X kind of syndrome. It's also a classic, be careful of getting into a relationship while Venus is retrograde, middle of May to end of June, because when Venus goes direct, you may think differently about it. Be careful of changing your appearance, because when Venus goes direct, you may think differently about it. So there's a need, and yesterday I emphasized, be careful of things like breakups, but also be careful of, in the Tao Te Ching it says, know the male but stick to the female. And there is, especially right now, there's a need to stick to the flow and the peace and the harmony and the emphasis on, the emphasis on restoring a sense of balance when it comes to intention, as opposed to the male, which is, see, at the end of the day, you need both. You can't just be Venus. You do need Mars to go protect you, and you do need Mars to go hunt and gather for you and achieve goals. And it doesn't matter what your gender is. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. You have Mars in you, you have Venus in you. And with Venus, it's an emphasis on give and take, diplomacy, harmony. Some would say passivity. With Mars, the emphasis is, with Venus, the emphasis is, again, a kind of egolessness. With Mars, the emphasis is on the ego. It is what I desire, what I want. What am I going after? And so that kind of aspect of attack and defense, particularly if it's kind of creating a bit of a cocktail with this reevaluating relationships and communicating about it, that is the one aspect of all of this that can misfire or not have the intended impact, while Mars is in Pisces from the middle of May to the end of June. So I would be careful of taking actions that are either an attack or a defense. Stick to the communication. Stick to inquiry, asking questions, asking for clarifications. If you get into attack or defense mode, you may find that you start to spin because you take that one action that has a Mars-like quality to it, and it goes into the water and it loses fizzle and it splashes all around and it makes you a little wet too. And then you have to go in and you have to take another action. Chances are you're going to be in defense mode again. And then you take it and then you wait, not the time. You won't be able to help it because there is a need. Here's the thing, here's the complexity. Wherever Mars goes, you have to take some action. So there is going to be a need for you, wherever the sign of Pisces is, to be in action, to achieve certain goals. That's the best thing that you can do, actually. If wherever the sign of Pisces is, and if you don't know that, if the focus of the Mars energy is to something tells me that Mars would be a good swimmer. And if he wasn't a good swimmer, he'd figure it out. Now, I do not know the mythology of it. So if some wise person out there writes to me and says, actually, Mars was a crap swimmer, that would help me out. But I'm going to go, it feels right for me to say that the energy of Mars in the ocean, Mars is not going to be as comfortable as a dolphin or a whale or anything that has fins or a tail, a fishy tail. But it would swim through Pisces, not as far or as fast. It would take a certain amount of effort and energy and stamina, but there's still work to be done. It isn't debilitated. It isn't fallen. It just isn't comfortable. It can't fly as fast. And think about shooting arrows in the ocean. They're just not going to go very far, and they might just end up falling close to your feet. And you might then have to pick them up and try and clean up the ocean. So be careful of, if you find yourself in a place where rather than responding simply, you are engaged in a kind of form of combat, just know that it'll just kind of, I've given you my warning. The best use of Mars in this part of the chart is to take the actions and achieve the goals and work on your to-do list and get those things done. That you're going to have to do with Mars in this part of the chart anyway. And all these planets are squaring each other, so there's going to be a tension. It's not an easy set of transits for anybody. And we've got eclipses, as I've said, April 4th to, frankly, August the 20th. But if you were really going to try to pin me down, frankly, from this new moon tomorrow till about the end of July, is in some ways the rockiest part of the year. But it becomes really important between now to the end of June to really understand where the impulse of attack and defense is right now. It's not going to lead to success. The achievement of goals and taking care of tasks and completing things constructively is one thing. Any act of conflict or war or battle is kinda is tricky. Be really careful. Be really careful. I've observed in both the readings I've done and even in some of the stuff that I've been dealing with, that whenever somebody goes into a kind of defense mode or it almost creates more of a spiral, when in fact, with Mercury so strong, all that may really be needed is clear, precise, concise communication. Okay? And it may have a reevaluating relationships and finances aspect to it, but I would much rather keep Mars's energy focused on the completion of constructive tasks, even if they have a kind of a defending or cleanup quality. Because the sign of Pisces has been so active for a long time, it could be that Mars's entry here every couple of years gives us the opportunity to put certain things in place and get them buttoned down. Okay, so if Pisces in the part of your chart, if you have a Virgo ascendant and Pisces in the part of the chart that has to do with partnerships and contracts and marriage, it could be that a constructive use of this time is to take care of, if you have to apply for things, or take care of applications, or take care of preparing for contracts, or take care of business, if there's anything to do with past issues, to some extent to do with partnerships. But it's not even that. It's taking care of business, getting things done. That is going to help you enormously. If you have Pisces in the 6th house, if you have to go and get checkups, or you have to deal with some health-related things, or you need to take your pet to the vet, these are productive ways of letting Mars's energy go in and take care of stuff. But, it's not really the best time to get into an argument with one's husband or spouse if you have a Virgo ascendant, or to fight over contractual things if you have a Virgo ascendant in 7th house stuff, or if it's in the 6th house, and you would then have to have a Libra ascendant. It's not really the time to. It's not the time to fight with colleagues. It's not the time to, just know that energy is not present to you just yet. The energy of shooting arrows is complicated. The energy of swimming with endurance to make it from the start of Pisces to the end of Pisces is the way to go. Okay, this theme, I'm doing a whole video on this because this is a transit. You can get by with ignoring a number of transits in a chart. You can never get by with ignoring where Mars is. That's where a lot of your energy is going to be spent. No question. No question. And it's not just one thing. This is what I was explaining in yesterday's video. You're not just dealing with one set of activity. You're not dealing with one set of relationships necessarily. You're not dealing with one set of challenges. You're not dealing with one set of complexities. You could be reevaluating things in your current relationship. You could have an ex turn up. You could be reevaluating relationships with friends you haven't been in touch with. You could be in contact with people you haven't been in touch with. All of that could be playing out right now. And each of those could be somehow connected by a Venus retrograde, but may have a very different flavor. And in Mars's case with Pisces, just pay attention to your to-do list and knock things out and get them done. And if you feel that there's a need to defend boundaries or maybe be engaged in a certain amount of combat, try to do it from the spirit of clear communication and concision and precision, as opposed to thinking that you can take a clear action. Those arrows are not going to go very far. Between the middle of May and the end of June, you have Mars in Aries for 6 months, unbelievably. Mars only spends, 6 weeks in a sign? You have Mars in Aries for 6 months in the second half of this year. And that is a lot of va-va-voom. So, so we have time enough for that. It is the 12 odd hours before the new moon. And something tells me that over the next 12 hours, and I can feel it for myself too, and the last 24 hours, the last lunar cycle wants to die down and wants to be done. So there is an element now of flatness, of completion, of a desire to not really be in a lot of interaction and a lot of just there's one transit that happens before the new moon tomorrow. the sun and the moon both separately trine Saturn before they come together. Let things stabilize before the new moon begins tomorrow, okay? Let things stabilize. Let things from the last new moon of the 22nd of April reach a kind of peaceful conclusion. And you may already have started to feel that the desire to pursue a great deal of action over the past 24 hours and including the next 12 hours is just not going to be there. There's a kind of a, you know what? Done. And that's okay. It's part of the cycle. It's part of the process. It's time to reflect. It's time to let go. It's time to release. The new moon will happen, alas, in Gemini with Venus retrograde and Mercury and these squares. And some of these themes are going to continue to develop, heading towards this eclipse on the 4th and then 2 other eclipses. Now, all of this, the eclipses, this Gemini energy that is working is really primarily active for another 30 days. Then at a certain point, we go back into themes that have been present since July of 2018. So it's a heady mix. There's a lot going on. And as you can tell, I'm going to make this the final point. As you can tell, I had said that once Venus goes retrograde and the planets start to go retrograde, we're going to be catching up with where things are at. And interesting announcements are coming out. You know, University of Cambridge not doing online lectures, at least for now, for a while, or companies like Twitter and Facebook posting that, you know, there's a move towards allowing people to work from home. There's a catch-up. There's a dealing with how fast certain things have moved to create a new reality in the month of April. And with Mars in Pisces, there's a need to tie up things that have been open since the end of 2015 and in 2016. But take the focus of completing pending tasks and swimming through the ocean from one portion of Pisces to the next. Observe for yourself what happens if you go into either attack or defense mode. Just observe. Just observe and see when you get that Mars energy and you really want to pursue what you want to pursue, and it's all about what you want to the exclusion of everybody, you know. Just see what happens. Shoot an arrow and let's see how far it goes. So just be mindful of that energy. As I said, it shifts at the end of June. If you liked this video, some of my previous 3 or 4 videos, if I may say so myself, are quite relevant. So do take a look at those. And in preparation for tomorrow, I'll post links to those once I'm done processing these. Feel free to like my video if you liked it, share it if you want to share it, subscribe to my YouTube channel. By all means, click on the bell icon next to the subscribe button so that you can be notified when I do new videos. My contact information is in the description area. You can contact me if you're curious about rates for a reading, or if you want me to make you an easy-to-read version of your chart that tells you which sign is in which house. You will need to know your birth time for that. For people who have listened to this spiel before, I suspect that you moved on to another video when I started this. I need to start sprinkling this information in the middle of the video so you don't check out too soon. Anyway, till tomorrow, happy new moon, and try to get a bit of a break and just kind of put up your feet for the next 12 hours if you already haven't been doing so for the past 24, and just kind of letting the last 28-day cycle kind of wash away. Who knows actually what this new moon in Gemini will bring, because there's definitely a feeling as we head into it of the first act of this kind of eclipse season that's been building from April the 4th kind of being over. So one of the questions that I have in observance as I look at this is so what is this new moon going to bring? Is it really going to be a development of what has been going on? Because the end of this new moon really does seem to have provided a kind of a completion or coda of it. Or is there actually something that's going to bubble up again or come up again that keeps that theme going? Or is it a completely different thing as part of this reevaluation? You know, if things were focused more on finances for you so far, is it going to be a relationship thing or vice versa? You know, it'll be interesting to see what this new moon in Gemini brings. A video on that tomorrow. Thank you.